Today we have a very special guest joining us, my friend Drew Craig. Drew is an economic geologist with extensive experience in emerging and frontier jurisdictions. He's the principal consultant at Rocklore Exploration Services, he's Enthalpy's EMEA principal associate, and he's a founding member of the Monexia team, who have built the NR private market investment platform. He's also a reserve officer, presently serving as the British Army's chief geologist. Thanks for joining us on The Rocks. Let's dive in. Welcome, Drew, to On the Rocks. Cheers before we start.
Indeed, absolutely. I've got one ready here, yeah.
I know, ready to go. What are you drinking today?
Well, I'm Scottish. It would be remiss of me not to imbibe a little bit of the amber nectar. And so recently after Robbie Burns night as well. So my favourite tipple on the whiskey front is Glenmorangie. And tonight I've got one of their sherry cask finish speciality whiskies, which is rather nice. So that's what I'm on.
Very nice. Well, since you and I met working together in Afghanistan, and as you are the senior geologist for the British Army, I am drinking Horse Soldier whiskey. Have you had this before?
I can't say I have, no.
Okay. So this is a bourbon that was started by some of the Special Forces guys who rode on horseback into Afghanistan.
Ah, brilliant.
They have a distillery in Tampa. The glass of the bottle is forged in 911 steel. All about Afghanistan and the work that's been done over there. So in honor of that, I'm drinking that whiskey, and Mark, my husband, who you know well, also made sure I'm drinking out of these glasses he got me. I don't know if you can see it through the screen,
okay, yeah.
But it's got a 308 round bullet that makes the handle of the glass.
Very appropriate. I've got my finest Edinburgh crystal.
Yeah, you're much classier than I am. Yeah. Well, so, I mean, you and I met in Afghanistan working together, but you've worked in all kinds of other crazy jurisdictions. What are some of the places you've wandered around?
Well, let's face it, Afghanistan was pretty far out there in many respects, not least the geology and just how fantastic that was. I've been really lucky over my career to get to some of those locations where it would be very challenging to get to now. And equally to get to some of those locations that are just incredibly challenging to get to at the best of times. So doing heli drilling in deepest, darkest Greenland, glacial terrain, striking ice features everywhere, just really, really stunning, through to deepest jungles of Suriname or South America, quite a bit of work in Africa. Yeah, crikey, everything up near the Arctic Circle in Russia.
Wow.
And then right across the Middle East. So I've done quite a lot in Saudi over the years, but one of my favorites was actually my first real sort of job in the exploration sector, which was in Yemen of all locations.
Oh, that was your first? Wow.
Yeah, perhaps a bit of a baptism of fire, but you can still go to Yemen, I suppose, right now, but it's very risky given the ongoing civil war there. But back in 2002, when I was out there, I was given the opportunity to work for a company called Zincox. They're developing a project called Jebel Salab, and I went out for 3 months. I spent the first month actually building the camp. Then all the drill kit arrived, and we did some manpack drilling all over the project. This was the final phase of resource drilling. 2 more months of work on that. It was a rather incredible experience. The scenery was stunning, high up in an escarpment in the middle of Yemen. Views as far as the eye could see. I think one of the things that really appeals to me when I work is the cultural aspects as well, and a really interesting cultural mix in Yemen as well, as I'm sure you've seen some of the locations you've been to as well.
Yeah, and it's always different than you expect when you get there. Every country is slightly different than I'm prepared for.
Yeah, you never stop being surprised. And I guess that's one of the tricks of being an exploration geologist is you've got to be fairly sort of adaptable and to a certain extent throw yourself in and immerse yourself in the culture. I mean, Yemen was just such a mix mash of different ways of doing things and having to sort of accommodate this and accommodate that whilst trying to instill no, health and safety really is important for you and for me and all those other things. But what a marvelous experience, and that really sort of stuck with me. And it was through the work there that I actually got involved with the SRK group, which obviously then led us to meeting when we were out in Afghanistan.
Do you have any memories that really stand out for you of working in Afghanistan with the team?
Probably spent cumulatively just over 6 months in and out, depending on which part of the project I was working on. I guess what was quite striking about the project was just the variety of stuff that we got involved with. From sitting in the ministry and sat opposite the minister and providing him with, advice and guidance on how he might build the sector, right the way through down to some of the stuff we were doing, flying around, looking at the sites and preparing for the tender round, or indeed working at the Afghan Geological Survey and trying to train up the local geologists, which is always one of the rewarding things when you're working abroad, is that you meet very often these very young, enthusiastic geologists who will just suck up the knowledge.
Yeah.
So working with them was very rewarding. But as I alluded to earlier on, just flying around Afghanistan, the geology there is truly stunning. And when you're when you're kind of flying just below the hilltops in a helicopter with the doors open, it's quite dramatic. It's quite exciting. And you really do get very close to the geology. Definitely memorable, as well as the broader team who we were working with. So some real characters in there. I think we'd agree.
Were you on the field trips to Balkab? I can't remember if you were with us on those ones.
Yeah, Balkab, Badakhshan, Zarkashan, and Shaida, I think.
One of my favorite memories is every time we would land at Balkab, which for the listeners is a copper project in sort of north central Afghanistan. We would land down there by the river, and all the villagers, of course, would come out to greet us. Because the Afghan Geological Survey had been doing field work there in the village every season, even the kids knew about the geology. And one time this little boy ran up and had like a little miniature rock hammer, and was showing us that he knew how to take little samples of the rocks. And to me, that always stands out because there's such a different perception around the Afghan people, and really how welcoming they were to us and how excited they were about geology and really about mining activity potentially coming into their area.
Yeah. What we often forget at the sort of front end of the industrial mining side of things is that there's been artisanal mining going on in these countries all around the world for millennia. I mean, everybody knows about the sort of legendary lapis of Afghanistan. It's been found all over the world in the tombs of the pharaohs and so on and so forth. So it just goes to attest to the, how the mining sector used to work and just how far those commodities got. You would struggle not to find some level of artisanal mining anywhere in the world. It never ceases to amaze me when I do go to some of these places where you do see a mine that was several thousand years old in reality. You kind of wonder about how on earth did they go about doing their business at the time. And what we need to remember is that the earth is evolving. Okay, we've got the current climate change issues to grapple with, but many of these sites back in the day were very possibly quite luscious, completely different rainfall patterns, and therefore they had the raw water as a commodity to use for processing the minerals. So where we would look at it now and go, this is just a barren desert, it might have been permissible for mining before. So it's really interesting in that respect as well when you see some of these sites.
Yeah, that even having worked throughout the Middle East and North Africa, just in general, it always strikes me at sites in that part of the world how you can feel the history, which at least for us here in the US, you don't get so often, right? There are fewer sites in our part of the world, but I always think of walking the path down to Petra, in Jordan. Walking this road past carved buildings into the side of a canyon, and you can just feel the years and years of people walking before you. And I always would get the same sense at Balkab, where there was a lot of slag, and we knew that people had been mining there a long, long time ago. It brings to mind, even with the lapis that you mentioned, a lot of people don't know the lapis in King Tut's mask came from Afghanistan as well, right? I mean, traveled a far away to get from Afghanistan to Egypt. It's phenomenal.
Absolutely. You look at some of those old trade routes and you said the minerals, they found traces of coca leaf from the sort of Bolivia and the Andes. They found that in the pharaonic tombs as well. So it just goes to show that, way back in the day, whether it was the Vikings or whether it was the South Americans or whomever, these trade routes existed. That's quite remarkable when you think about it.
Yeah, we always think of the world today as being incredibly connected, but it's actually been connected for a long time, right? Just not as fast.
It's just not as fast, yes. There were all those connections in there, yeah, for sure. It's almost to the point of being, I don't know, dare I say, almost overly connected these days. I mean, both what you're doing with Prospector and what I'm doing with NR Private Markets through the Monexia Group, we're effectively trying to shorten that time even more. Well, certainly because of the COVID pandemic, we're seeing a large number of those groups who have developed products that can kind of bring the field trip to you. I think you've spoken to some of the guys from Verify, for example, so you get these virtual tours now. And this is just it's a slowly a steady march towards just digitizing everything. Now, fundamentally, you're never going to get away from the need, I hope,
right,
of having a geologist on the ground with his rock pick and his, or excuse me, his or her rock pick or hand lens going out in there prospecting. Indeed, as we saw in Afghanistan, the fact that we could fly the whole of the country with HIMAP and get that data set, let alone the geophysics, let alone the amazing work that was done by the US geological team to sort of vector in on the sites of interest. I mean, it's really quite remarkable what we can do now. And even more so, the sort of machine learning, artificial intelligence systems that are coming online now that can crunch those huge volumes of data. You look at a number of jurisdictions around the world where the US Geological Survey or the French BRGM or the British Geological Survey have been in and done long-term target generation programs. They've done stream sediment sampling. They've done geophysics of one form or another. And there are these huge volumes of data that if they can be smashed and compacted together and properly analyzed, start spitting out these anomalies that we hadn't spotted that before because we just couldn't drill down over all those layers. And there's some really interesting work going on with a number of companies who are really getting involved with that. And very much like what you guys are doing with Prospector Portal.
Yeah, and I know for me, Prospector really came out of my experience working in very frontier markets and knowing the key questions that investors ask to de-risk a project and how they evaluate risk. There's a lot that goes into technical and financial due diligence, absolutely, at the later stage of someone making an investment. But early on, they look at a few key things. They look at jurisdiction, the country, the commodity they're interested, the development stage of the project, essentially, and the level of resource or reserve estimate. And that's really why we started Prospector, was to allow people to simply search by key investment criteria and generate a deal flow list. And again, that really came out of me working with people looking at very risky jurisdictions or jurisdictions that are perceived as very risky. And I wonder, how much has your experience in frontier markets influenced what you do in our private markets?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how you sort of explain how you sort of slice the information up. And in many ways, that's similar to how we do it. So we've got our 4 C's. If you go down to a jeweler, you want a diamond ring, you're looking for your cut clarity, so on and so forth. We break our 4 C's down into the country, the concession, the commodity, and the company. So it's very similar to yourself. And then our process, it's all sort of internal vetting in effect. But we'll look at a range of factors for each one of them. For a country, for example, we're looking at some of the standardized factors that are published. Is it the Fraser Institute report? Is it the corruption index? Is it the human development index? And there's lots of these metrics out there from the World Bank or whomever it might be that you can actually take a specific figure and then you can benchmark that against those countries' peers or just put them in an overall pecking order. So you can do a bit of sort of numerical mathematics ranking there, but you can also take a view. For example, if you look at the top 10 copper and gold producers around the world, whilst many of those are sort of top mining, Australia, Canada, whatever it might be, there's a large number of others who what many would define as being fairly high in the risk spectrum. And I guess that's probably where Monexia came into being in the early days, is that because of the collective experience of those involved, some of us had military backgrounds, many of us had worked in some of those more crunchy jurisdictions, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Saudi, and had a better appreciation for you can work in these areas. You just need to be slightly more savvy. But how do you communicate that to an investor? Obviously across the investment side you have sort of open retail, pretty much fill your boots. There's no limitations on that. And then there's the sophisticated, self-certified high net worth and the like. And that's really where we focus and with Monexia, within our private market platform, is to look at those sophisticated investors who want to do that enhanced level of due diligence value the fact that we have vetted the deals that go on our platform and gone through our process to make sure that it's something of note. It's not just a pile in, everybody have a go at this sort of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that vetting is so important. And oftentimes I know investors who aren't familiar with the mining industry or maybe haven't invested in it before get a little overwhelmed perhaps by the technical data or even the financial structure in some cases, because mining investments can be a bit different than others. And I think having that level of vetting done must give your subscribers, your members, a much higher level of confidence in the deals that they're looking at.
Yeah, well, we certainly like to think so. I mean, the interesting thing is where we hope to be headed next. And in effect, our platform is deal agnostic, which is why we did our first fintech deal last year. And that was really exciting. It was something new. Yes, fair to say we were outside our comfort zone, but worked very hard to make sure we were comfortable with the deal, spoke very closely to the company. And that's, looking really interesting. But that sort of justified our logic that the platform is a transactional space. And therefore, you could put any form of deal on that, because in effect, you're just providing the sort of the gray space between your pool of investors and your issuers. So we are looking very closely at the green tech, fintech spaces, and a range of others where things look to be sort of picking up a pace. And again, it comes back to what I said earlier on about the sort of digitization of the market. And we've been forced down this route to a certain extent by COVID, or to a large extent by COVID, let's say. I think many would say it was probably going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
And that what COVID has done is just accelerated that. It's not just accelerated, it's stuck it into orbit, because these things are moving so quickly now, which is exciting. It's got a lot of pressure. I'm sure you'd agree from what you're doing as well. But I mean, there's a lot of things we can do to help ourselves there. And you guys have hit it on the head by looking at the NI 43101 as the standard, post BRIEX, the advent of the 43101 as the go-to standard. And yes, other standards are available, but most people understand and can grapple with the NI 43101 because it's so well laid out. Everybody understands this chapter, that chapter, that chapter. And look, for the early stage projects, chapters sort of 12 through to 20, it probably says they haven't done any work yet. It's great when you're writing those reports, you can get them done really quickly. It's easy to understand, and you know which chapter to go to for that information. And JORC does something very, very similar with the table system that they employ. So standardization is ultimately good for investors. It's good for the issuers. It's good for the technical teams working for the issuers. And I think the more and more that can be standardized, the better. The challenge that we have within the mining sector is actually the quality of the reports. It's all very well having, the standard list of things you have to write, but it's actually the devil of the detail that's gone into that's key. And there's quite a number of commentators out there who, regularly have a good look at the standard of the reports out there, and I think justifiably are taking people to task. And there's another, we're talking about platforms and things like that. There's a few more systems I think coming out that will pick through those in a little bit more detail to give those sort of investors who are doing that elevated level of due diligence more comfort, more information, so they can make an educated, informed choice on their investment.
Yeah, I know one of the interesting features that we put onto Prospector that we didn't think was going to be as popular as it is the ability to see how many other reports the QP or the qualified person has written on that commodity or on assets in that country. And I've spoken to several investors who are surprised at how many reports certain QPs have signed off on. I think just the ability to see the amount of work that folks have done in a certain area or on similar projects tells you a lot, especially if you're trying to evaluate, how much you want to trust what the report is saying. It's a tough thing because there is a standard, but as with any standard, like you said, it doesn't mean every report is the same, right? They have the same structure, but they're not all the same quality. But I think we heard that a lot when we started Prospector. Oh, you're going to base it on 43101s? Like, nobody reads them because they're like 300 pages long and super dry. And people are looking for, 5 or 6 key sentences in a 300-page report. at that initial stage. Later on, folks dive in deep, but I think that's where we hope we're making the 43101s more useful by making them more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, if you're out there managing a family office or some sort of fund and, oh, golly, where do I put my money? Well, you probably have a general idea of the sort of just jurisdictional risk that you're comfortable with. You might be very clear on your intent to look at precious metals or base metals or some of the newer areas, energy metals, lithiums and the like. You might have a pretty good idea, or you might be kind of like, I'm not really not sure. I'm open to anything above a certain quality line. So the more and more we can sort of digest and distill that down and make it readily indexable, the better. And I think that's certainly what you guys are achieving with Prospector. I mean, coming back to your comments about the authors earlier on, I mean, here's an interesting thought. Take those reports and then go and actually retrospectively look at the success of the project after the author has written it. I think we will probably in the coming years see greater scrutiny over the quality of the reports that's being done. You were certainly, miles ahead of where we were. Again, mentioning the sort of Bre-X catalyst for all of this, but yeah, there's still a quality issue in many cases.
In the meantime, I think you made a great point about the power of digitization and the ability to, in simple terms, put layers on top of layers and look for anomalies that would have taken you a much, much longer time to identify, or maybe would not have seen if you didn't have digital data. And I think that leads us into another D word, which is democratization, which is something you and I have talked quite a bit about. And with the GameStop scenario that's happened over the last week or so, I think is a really interesting one around mining. On the one hand, we want to encourage participation in the sector, right? And you want people to jump in and invest and get involved. But on the other hand, it is a technical space. And what's the balance between getting people excited and involved, but through investing in the sector, while also making sure they know what they're investing in? Or do you think it's important for people to really know all the technical details?
Yeah, really good question. I think in the current era, I think it's way more than just the technical side of things. And I think if you look at your atypical, sophisticated millennial investor, yes, the technical aspects are key, but I think they've also got a very keen eye on the environmental, social governance aspects as well.
Yeah.
And that whole democratization piece is just as much about that as it is the access to the technical details and making these deals more open to everybody. And not, shall we say, the sort of traditional broker financing, which is maybe open to a very small subset of the investor population, just because that's where the contacts are, and it just doesn't get that far. That just news of the opportunity doesn't go that far. That's certainly why we're trying to do with the NR platform is open it up. But the ESG one is an interesting one. The proliferation of sophisticated recording devices, i.e. Mobile phones. You could be in the deepest, darkest part of wherever, and somebody will pick out their smartphone and start recording you. And therefore, from an ESG point of view, traditionally often thought of being, well, that's kind of for the board to worry about. Now you have to make sure that everybody from the chairman down through the board, through the non-execs, through to the advisors, the consultants, the field teams, right the way down to the cook, but your geotechs on the ground. They need to know, why are they there? What are they doing to make sure that they are looking after the environment? What is the company doing to look after the social sphere around them? A lot of companies will sort of arbitrarily throw some money at ESG. It's like, well, let's go and build a school.
The warm, fuzzy projects, as we call them.
But yeah, we have seen this in the military as well. Great, you built a school. Congratulations. Now what are you going to do? Oh, crikey. Well, you need a teacher to sustain that capability. A lot of people just don't think necessarily, a lot of organizations don't think long term. And fundamentally, if you look at a lot of the overseas development agencies, one of the sort of key underlying tenets they'll often work to is do no harm. You've got to look at that in the short, medium, and long term. And I think we will see, thankfully, I think it's a good thing, I think we'll see more and more scrutiny over ESG. I know there's a lot of other companies out there who are looking to develop standards. There are some standards out there already. They're not sort of locked in. There's no one sort of gold standard anybody's subscribing to at present. But I think that may come to the point that somebody has almost ESG accreditation given to them.
Yeah.
Is that a gold star on your platform or my platform, whatever it might look like? I don't know, but I think we're headed somewhere down in that direction.
Yeah, and I think it brings up a point also that ESG is also something that isn't a one-time deal, right? That ESG will evolve into an accountability measure as well, right? That you have a plan, you work the plan, you can go in and essentially audit the plan and know that the companies have stuck to what they committed to, which I think is really important and is where technology also really comes into play with the transparency, whether that's the ability of people to film you and tweet out that you're not following your plan, or monitor things remotely also, as we increasingly work remote, a kind of team in the UK monitor and make sure that their team in Yemen is doing what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to do it, right? That's, I think, how people think mining technology, and they think machines that move on their own.
Yeah. Automation.
Automation, right, exactly. but it really comes into play as much on the investment and the management side as it does kind of the cool earth mover vehicles.
Yeah, I think you've touched upon another really interesting point there. So that ability to remotely monitor. Obviously, in the last couple of years, we've seen a number of terrible disasters with tailings dams failing. I think it would be fair to say that the repercussions for those incidents have yet to play through. I think we're going to see greater and greater scrutiny on specific parts of mining infrastructure like that, because those are legacy issues. They will stay there for eternity once the mine finishes. So they have to be monitored for a good long time. But I think what's really interesting is that we are seeing the ability to have cameras and various other sensors continually monitoring and looking for change, whether that is monitoring a pit face and looking for the threat of a slope failure. Several examples of that, Bingham Canyon a few years ago, where they knew it was happening, they could monitor it, and thankfully managed to get everybody out in time. By putting sensors on the ground, you can, whether it's satellites or whether there's a daily routine of your little drone at the mine, that we've also seen drones permeate right across mining, that your little drone goes up, does its survey, flies its LiDAR, radar, whatever it is, and plugs in, downloads the data, and it's all automated. A human being doesn't need to be involved. If a red light goes on saying there's been a displacement of a certain number of millimeters that exceeds the tolerance level given the weather conditions, et cetera, okay, well, I better go and monitor that a bit more closely. And I think we'll see more of that automation aspect come through for monitoring sites, let alone monitoring the people on the sites, the technology that's going into mining cabs. We're seeing some of that through the whole sort of Tesla type thing, the driverless cars, the autonomy that's there, collision avoidance, or monitoring drivers, operators for tiredness.
Well, in the wearables even, right? Like air quality underground, like all the wearable technology. I mean, and it always makes me think about, you and I have both worked you actually are in the reserves, right? In the military, but me having worked as a DoD civilian, we've seen so much of how technology and innovation that was developed originally for the military eventually finds its way into the private sector. And sometimes it goes the other way around. And I know some of the sensor work that's gone on it's just so cutting edge that probably even 5 years ago, it was probably only used in the defense space. And now it's just incredible the way it's integrated into everyday operations, not just in the mining space, but certainly in our industry.
Oh, the reduction in cost, new materials, lighter, cheaper materials, the Internet of Things, the connectivity that you can achieve now. Certainly in the UK, the advent of 5G networks and the speed that carries.
Satellites in general.
Absolutely. Well, it seems to be if you have the money these days, you're sticking satellite constellations into orbit. Not one or two, by the hundreds, if not thousands.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be really interesting to see how that will affect mineral exploration. Again, one of my other sort of early jobs, I was in Saudi Arabia for 3 months, and once a week I got to go back to the nearby mine site and sort of clunk away on a very, very slow dial-up modem to check my emails, which were, really, really basic. Okay, I had a satellite phone, for emergencies and things like that, but that was it. But we're getting to a point now where you can be literally anywhere in the world, and you'll have, at minimum, sort of 3G signal all the way up to whatever these satellite constellations are going to deliver. That comes back to our point about everybody as a reporter at that point with their mobile phone, but certainly in terms of you as a explorationist to be able to operate on the ground, collect data quickly, assimilate that data, almost to the point of that gets shunted back up through the network to sort of the mainframe somewhere. Although, quite frankly, the processing power even on the handhelds is
now it's in the cloud.
yeah. That you're almost getting results on the hoof. I mean, portable XRFs will give you a degree of that information, and really exciting to see what's happening with some of the drilling technology as well. So whether it's the directional drilling technology that would have been more sort of oil and gas before, that is now far more accessible for mining, down the hole sensing, the various geophysics sensors available. I mean, I think the key thing is that we're generating so much data now. It's just incredible. I think the last PDAC was I went to was a couple of years ago, and I was absolutely gobsmacked to see some of the X-ray systems that were available now. You'd put your core in the machine, and it would X-ray the core, and you could see all the mineralogy. There's my gold distribution or whatever it happens to be. I mean, that is just staggering. It's a staggering level of information, a staggering amount of data as well. And that's probably going to be the biggest issue. We're going to eventually get to a point where we're going to drown in the data.
Well, that's where I think the next leap I anticipate we'll have is this move into big data, right? Which other industries are already dealing with, but I think it's taken a little while for our industry to get there, not because the technology is not there, but partly because of how mining exploration is financed. There's been a slower adoption rate of the new technology that's come out. Right? If you can do it cheaper with a few junior geos logging core, right, out in the field, and you've only been able to raise $1 million because that technology is always a bit expensive when it first comes out. I think it's taken a little while, but especially with the way the market's going right now, I wouldn't be surprised if we're hitting big data levels in a year and a half. What do you do with all of it, right? How do you use it?
Well, that's it. Again, you come back to the AI machine learning capabilities. We've got the processing power. These computers can handle it. I suppose it's the key thing with any one of these sort of questions is it's asking the right question. If you don't ask the right question and you've got all that data, the computer's still not going to be able to spit out the right answer.
Well, and as we've learned with Prospector, the computer has to be able to speak geology and speak mining. Right. And it was an interesting exercise for us coming up with a taxonomy at the very beginning. Like I remember one of our developer team said, okay, so for this phrase, volcanogenic massive sulfide, which is the most important word? Volcanogenic massive or sulfide? Like those kinds of questions that you really have to go back and deconstruct how we talk about geology in order to really get the most out of machine learning and AI applied to those big data sets.
Yeah. If you look at the sort of recent era information, okay, it's the digitally available stuff, that's great. But I mean, when you start getting your head around the older archives of material that predate the digital era, slowly but surely, a lot of that is being digitized, and there's absolutely some money hidden away in that.
Yeah.
To be picking up on a very subtle geochemical anomaly in a data set from, golly, the 1950s or whatever it was. It's on a typed piece of paper in some folder somewhere. To have that digitized and to be able to pick through that, and back then that wasn't anomalous, but by golly, it possibly is now. And suddenly you suddenly start finding where's that on the map, right? Who's got that bit of ground?
Well, I remember us going over that with the Soviet reports in Afghanistan, right? When we were looking at things that the Soviets were paying no attention to in the 70s. I mean, they captured it, but it wasn't their priority. And then we would look at those assay results and be like, holy cow, like, let's go find that.
The Soviets, wherever you've seen them gone out and done geological expeditions, I mean, this wasn't just prospecting, this was systematic semi-militarized, it's battalions of geology, stroke drilling, and all the rest of it. They deploy out there to do these extensive programs. And somewhere abroad, like Afghanistan, and all the work they did in the 70s and the 60s, or whether it's just across the FSU states themselves, huge volumes of data. But it's getting into the weeds of that. And yeah, okay, they've got a slightly different system. The GKZ system is different to JORC, and it's different to the sort of Canadian approach to resources and reserves. But it's probably fair to say that we're getting closer to at least some way to understand what equates to what across those standards. And at that point, you're sort of leveling the playing field of information across all those jurisdictions. You can pull that all together, and it starts getting really exciting. Whether you want to go to that particular jurisdiction and then follow up is really depends on your investors and what your intent is. But there's definitely some opportunities to be had out there.
Well, I think that's also connecting in the Soviet, essentially military geologists and your experience. The other neat connection, I think, is this increased focus on critical minerals. And as we develop new technology, whether that's for commercial purposes or also in the defense space, the applications that are being invented every day that require different metal and different minerals than what we've used for the last several decades. I think, of course, the one that everyone talks about is rare earths, right? And their defense applications and how important rare earths have become, where, again, back in the 70s, the Soviet geologists looked at Khanashin, right, a carbonatite in southern Afghanistan that has light rare earths, but we're looking at it for uranium, right? They didn't care about the rare earths. How much has changed now in those decades? And I think that's the flip side, is what kind of minerals are we going to care about in the next 20 to 30 years that we really don't care about right now?
Yeah, technology is just going so quickly right now. We're obviously riding the lithium wave right now. All very well and good until somebody invents a battery that uses something else. I don't know. And you read some of the scientific papers out there, and people are certainly doing it. Clearly, there is the sort of the overarching intent across certainly most of the Western nations to look at greener technology, to look at how to grapple with the challenge of climate change. But fundamentally, the sort of adage of if you can't grow it, you've got to mine it still rings true. And yes, great, we're going to build the biggest wind farm in Europe. And certainly in the UK, we've got, I think, some of the, if not one of the largest sort of wind farm capabilities in the world right now. And it's due to grow. But that's great. But you need your copper for the turbines. You need your rare earths for the magnets. You still need all your other materials to build the blades, to build the foundations and the superstructure for these things, to put the cable from out in the sea to get it on shore as well. So you fundamentally still need those raw materials. So it's let's call it a dirty necessity, but
maybe a rocky necessity. Not rocky.
yeah. It's a fact of life. You cannot get away from the fact that we need these raw materials. Coming back to the current COVID epidemic, you look at the countries and what they are doing to stimulate their economies, and they are pouring money into infrastructure. Well, infrastructure needs steel, it needs cement, it needs all those other raw materials. And funnily enough, we're back again into mining. And I think what's striking in terms of that need for those raw materials is actually taking a step back and looking at the people who need to be servicing that mining sector. And I'm not sure what it's like in the States or Australia, but certainly in the UK, if you look across the universities, there are a lot less courses focused around geology in the first part, let alone mining, compared to what there was certainly back in 98, 99 when I was doing my master's. Now, yeah, mining is cyclic. I get it. I learned the hard way coming off my master's in mineral exploration in 99 to gold at $250 an ounce, and the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK selling most of our gold reserves for very little. But, and then we went on through to 2007, dropped off again, and then back up to the heights of 2011. So we've got the cyclic nature of the mining sector. But where's the next generation, or the generation of after that, of geologists, engineers, geotechnicians, geochemists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We need those. That's probably going to be a big challenge in the future, is actually just having those people with the right knowledge, skills, and experience to support the sector. Probably one of the greatest challenges, I would say, to the mining sector in the future is that capability.
Yeah, I mean, we focus at Prospector a lot on talking about mining differently in order to attract millennial or younger investors, but I think it's also the case for workers, right? If all they hear about is how terrible mining is and it pollutes the environment, and they have this image that you're still working in the coal mines of the 1950s, right? If that continues to be the perception, you're not going to get people to work in it. And in fact, the industry is so different than that perception. We use so much technology. It is a safe industry. It can be, in most cases, a very clean industry. And I do think the industry has done a terrible job in marketing itself to the next generation of mining workers and leaders, frankly. You don't see people, you never hear someone like leaving Tesla to go run a mining project, right? Or leave Twitter to go run a mining project. Why is that? You don't see this transition or jumping into the industry because people, frankly, aren't excited about it who aren't already in it, which is a shame.
I don't think there's a silver bullet to get around it either. I think the economics will ultimately speak for themselves. If we get back to the sort of the dizzy heights of 2007, 2011, where graduates were being snapped up off the production line, being sent out to a field camp, and paid handsomely, I think we may very well get back to that point, because at that point your geologist is a commodity, and if you want a good geologist, you're gonna have to pay for them.
But there's that lag, right? Where if you don't have enough people who have gone through a geology program to snatch up, if we continue to shut down geology and mining programs at the universities, you won't even have those people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I also think it'll be interesting to see with the changes in media and how, people are paying attention now, again, at least to certain commodities, if we see some very visible leadership, I think, that comes out of the current industry that can really make it inspiring and attractive for folks, right? I mean, in other industries, you certainly have a group of innovative leaders. Maybe we'll be the ones with NR Private Markets and Prospector, but it'll be interesting to see if you have new folks come into the industry that people look to and say, hey, that's a really cool career, I want to do that.
I think credit where credit's due. Every time I've gone to PDAC, I have been absolutely gobsmacked at just how well they have communicated the opportunity for mining. And obviously, mining's a big part of sort of Canadian culture and life, contributes significantly to their economy. But cutting about the PDAC and seeing the groups of students, right the way down to primary kids who are being taken around and shown the core, the drill rigs, everything that's on show there. I mean, crikey, I can imagine being a third grader, as you'd say in the States, or something like that, and going into this massive hall and seeing all this kit and all these rocks of every color and shape and form. I'd be absolutely blown away. So I think that's brilliant. And I think we need to see sort of more of that openness and getting out there and showing the kids what's out there. I've on occasions gone and spoken to primary school kids. And all you need to do is, quite frankly, all you need is a handful of fossils, and they're literally in your hand. But equally, if you're showing them bits of rock with even just a great big lump of pyrite, they're immediately drawn in. It's a fascinating subject, because obviously geology has chemistry, it's the geography aspects, the physics. It's a real sort of mix mash of all the sciences and history and everything else, maths rolled in. It's just disappointing that it's not really more taught as a subject in its own right, certainly here in the UK.
Well, so to circle back to how we opened, in order to close, if you could work in one country in the world that you haven't worked in yet, where would you go?
I have to be careful with this answer, because if I phrase it wrongly, some people's backs are going to be right up. The country that I would most dearly love to go and do geological work in, well, it's not so much a country, but it would be the continent of Antarctica.
Ah, okay.
Very obvious for very good reasons, legal or otherwise. There's no mineral exploration going on there. But I think as a piece of ground as remote and as barren, ice barren as it is, I think that would just be quite incredible. So yeah, I think somewhere like that.
That would be cool. Similarly, mine isn't quite a country, but I would love to be involved in the deep sea mining. I just think it would be so neat to, from a technical perspective, but I used to love those Dirk Pitt novels.
Yeah.
Do you remember
Go,
those? You know,
go, Clive Cussler. Yeah, no, I'm
yeah,
huge,
yeah.
huge fan. Yeah, no, brilliant.
I mean,
The Numa
the
files and
adventure,
stuff like that.
exactly, the undersea archaeology component. So I've always been fascinated with submersibles and how all of that would work. So I think that would be my version.
That's quite a good one as well. Yeah, no, for sure. And you might as well take it the next step beyond that and head into outer space as well. That's we know more about the surface of the moon than we do of the seabed of Earth. So
Very true. Yeah. I mean, and I do think, we spend a lot of time looking at space mining, and I think it's fascinating. But for some reason, I think because it's so little is known really about the ocean, that does jump out to me even more. Maybe I'm just less scared to go underwater than I would be to go into
well,
space. Yeah. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Drew, for joining, and from Afghanistan to Antarctica to the bottom of the ocean. Look forward to staying in touch and hearing where you go next.
Thank you so much for having me. A real pleasure to catch up with you. And I think it's going to be an interesting year ahead. And let's see where we go. So cheers.
Cheers. Thank you to our guest and my colleague, Drew Craig, for joining us on this episode of On the Rocks. To learn more about Drew and NR Private Market, visit nrprivatemarket.com and check him out on LinkedIn at Drew Craig Mining Exploration and on Twitter at MarketNR and at Sapper Geologist. For more about Prospector, go to prospectorportal.com or check us out on Instagram at ProspectorAI and LinkedIn at Prospector Portal. Thanks for joining us on the rocks. Until next time, keep your glasses full and your ice cold. Cheers.